person by the name of Hal Leroy, who played the part of Harold Teen. And the whole story goes that he does not know how to dance, but toward the end of the movie, he blows everybody away with a fabulous dancer. And he did pretty well in the movies until about 1940. It was hard to compete with the likes of Fred Astaire. Went to Broadway and did pretty well as well. But anyway, this was 1934, so at least the Sugar Bowl was starting. And it was, of course, it was always continued in the comic strip. But now they started adopting Covina. We had put Covina in there from time to time. But as time went along, by 1938, Bob Crosby's Swing Dixie Band decided to make a recording of Swingin' at the Sugar Bowl. Wonderful, wonderful recording. And it even has some lyrics in there saying, and doing the Covina roll. Very popular one. We have a copy of it in our museum. So this is very well known across the country. At least Covina got on the map, so to speak. So then by 1960, the Sugar Bowl pretty well closed down. Frank Lyons took over the Sugar Bowl and it became Lyons Den, a cafe, and also a catering service, and then eventually Giovanni's came into that location. But on the very corner there, which is the southwest corner of College and Citrus, where you see Starbucks now, was the very first bank to come to Covina. It was the Covina Valley Bank, a branch of one in Azusa. And after that, of course, it became a hardware store, a pharmacy, a beauty salon, and then finally Starbucks. But by 1924, they needed to expand. So they moved across the street to where Powell's Camera used to be. By the way, Powell's Camera was on that location from about 1961 until present times. You can see it still shows Camera Shop there. But the building itself only went up about halfway up Citrus, although it went all the way down along the west side of College. And of course, beyond that was the first Ford agency, later Studebaker agency, and the wonderful Methodist church that was built in the 1890s. And here's an earlier photo of what the old bank looked like after they had that little bit of addition there. And I think it was maybe a hardware store in that northern portion. Of course, they kept adding on to the north because we have photos to indicate that there were even homes in there at that time. Here's an interior view of the bank as it would have been in the early part of the 20th century. Well, looking north on Citrus from the northwest corner of College, you see additional buildings. They were all built around 1900, early 1900, so they are about 100 years old, at least the first two beyond that. And one of the occupants, probably in the 1930s, you'll see Piggly Wiggly Market, might have even come in a little bit earlier than that. They were in the northern half of that building. And then we had Cornett Five and Dime Store, came in 1935. Joe Cornett lived here in Covina. Matter of fact, from what I understand, he put a whole branch of Cornetts all over the country. I think it was like well over 100, and even had a very large one in Hawaii, in Honolulu. And north of that, we also had the Palace of Sweets, although it didn't survive the Depression, unfortunately. But there have been a lot of changes as time went along in that building. But speaking of the bank again, the First National Bank of Covina, they needed to expand again in 1924, so they built this bank on the northeast corner of College and Citrus. But by the 1930s, it may have been mid to 1930s, why Bank of America took them over. And as you know, it's been a bank ever since. Went through Brentwood, Mutual, CalFed, Citibank, you name it, there's always been a bank there. But to the north of it, where CalMart is presently, was a feed store, I understand, initially, and then Newberry's 5 and 10. You got to have competition for Cornett straightly across the street, but anyway, that's the way it goes. And basically, we'll move over now to the west side of the street again. Although the building just to the north of where we had Cornett and so forth, it's on the alleyway next to the building that looks quite old, although it's 1926. they completely built this other building. But where Casa Moreno is presently was built in 1926. Eventually taken over by the Smith Family Trust. But there have been a lot of changes. Basically in the 1920s, it was the Ellen Hotel upstairs, and downstairs on the ground floor was a pool hall and billiards and the like, and in the basement was a bowling alley that went over part of Citrus Avenue. And then by the 1930s, the Ellen Hotel became the Cove Hotel, and then the ground floor and the basement turned into a furniture store. And if you look further north, you'll see basically at the, I guess, the northwest corner of Cottage and Citrus, where Taco Bell is presently, was the wonderful Vendome Hotel. It was the first important hotel to come to Covina. It came here about 1900. And in 1916, it changed its name to the Covina Hotel. And they'd even take people off the street if they wanted to eat, have meals there, which was a good way of making some extra money besides just having tenants that stayed in the hotel itself. But by 1935, it was torn down, and we have a Shell gas station. And presently, we have Taco Bell, so it's seen a lot of changes. But looking over on the east side, where the bookstore is presently, this was originally a Safeway market that came here in 1938. And basically where Jocelyn's Bakery is was a parking lot for the Safeway market. So a lot has changed in that area as well. And if you go across the street to the northeast corner of Italia and Citrus, where there's a vacant lot now, was a very, very important building that went in 1927. It was the first skyscraper to come to Covina. It was 3 stories high. It was a Logan Stead building. Logan Hardware and Stead Electric, a lot of electric appliances, and we have a view of that as well. Unfortunately, it burned down many years later. Now, going up to the southeast corner, where the Civic Park is presently, most of the early schools actually started there. A grammar school that started in the 1890s, and we have a view of that. Although by that earlier time, by 1899, they actually had a high school in the upper floor, and then by that time they had to do something with a high school, so they built a separate high school in 1903, and eventually by 1908 they moved down to Citrus between Dexter and Puente. So the other high school remained there until 1908. Well, by 1919, another image shown here is the Covina Grammar School, which of course faced Covina or Citrus Avenue. Most of them did, I think, at that time. So that was more of the modern one. I think Aerojet took it over some years later, and they figured it was not earthquake proof, but it was a heck of a job knocking it down. It was so well built. So now we'll go up to basically the southwest corner of San Bernardino Road and Citrus, where the Ford agency was. And you'll notice it's kind of L-shaped. Well, it went in the 1920s with the idea that it actually was a drive-through market. And that was very popular in the late 20s and into the early 30s, where you could actually go in and tell them what you wanted, and they brought it to you, brought it to your car. Well, that was an interesting concept, but it just didn't last. And speaking of Piggly Wiggly, I read not too long ago that they actually started the self-service market concept that we have today as early as 1920, so they were way ahead of the time. And on the northwest corner of San Bernardino Road and Citrus, where we have Clippinger and the Chevrolet there, basically there was a filling station on that corner as early as 1915, maybe even a little bit before. But I heard a story from Norm Clippinger, who told me some years ago, because they founded their Clippinger Chevrolet there in 1921. But there, before the gas station was still there, Irvin Reynolds decided he wanted to buy a new Buick, and the only agency nearby was in Los Angeles, so he went to Los Angeles, and they said, why don't you buy one and see if you can't sell it and see how you do? So he set up a little desk in the service station and started selling one after another, and before he knew it, by 1921, he built that new facility down at the east corner of Badillo and Citrus, and of course by the 1960s moved further down on Citrus Avenue. So that's a real success story because it's been a family-owned business since 1915. I think his grandson is running the business presently. Now we're going to cross the Metrolink tracks and look at the bargain box, which is put up by the Intercommunity Hospital Auxiliary to raise funds for the hospital. It's kind of a thrift shop. But this is the last remaining packing house in Covina, unfortunately. We had as many as 10 packing houses, more than any other city. And it's just a shame that only have one thing even left, even though it isn't a packing house anymore. This was built in 1927 as the Valencia Heights Orchards. And it's too bad that that's all we have today. But looking over on the east side, right across from it, of course, is the Metrolink tracks. And that's where the wonderful Southern Pacific Station was when it came in here in 1895, and we have an image of that as well. As a matter of fact, a lot of products went out of that station. I understand in 1929, in the whole Southern Pacific Railway system, that Covina shipped more goods out of this Covina station than any other city in the country outside of Los Angeles and New Orleans. So that's quite a distinction. So why don't we kind of finish up things by going to our wonderful Covina Valley Historical Society Museum. It was the original firehouse jail, built in 1911. Mission Revival architecture. There's one similar to that in Glendora, built in 1913. But the fire department moved over to the new City Hall. We have images, of course, of the fire department and the fire engine out in front, and other images, of course, of the rear and of the side of the Historical Society building presently. But the fire department moved into the new City Hall in 1930, and you'll see a present image showing facsimiles of the fire department doors that would come out on College. If you look above it, you'll see a plaque that says Covina Fire Department. Here's an old image taken shortly after it was inaugurated and commissioned the new City Hall in 1930. And we certainly invite people to come to our Historical Society Museum because it's also, even though the police stayed there for a while and they eventually moved down onto Citrus in the 1960s, it wasn't until 1976 when they built that new fire and police department up there at 2nd and San Bernardino Road that the jail was finally abandoned. And so the jail was there for 65 years. That was a long time. But I want to show a final image of Covina. And of course, we certainly invite you to come to our museum, which is open every Sunday from 1 to 3, except for holiday weekends. But this image was taken in March of 1941, looking at Mount Baldy and kind of the north right side. You'll see the township of Covina and all the rest of citrus groves with palm trees lining some of the main streets. So we're really proud of this wonderful city of Covina and hope it lasts forever. Thank you.